Just sign it, Noah. Don't make this harder than it needs to be.
I wanted to see your face when I told you. I'm with Julian now. Have been for 4 months. That's it?
That's it.
Mr. Noah Jackson?
Your father was Arthur Jackson. My father left when I was small.
He passed 8 months ago. You're the sole heir to a $50 billion estate, one that just unlocked 4 minutes ago, the moment your divorce was finalized.
The coffee in front of me is cold. I haven't touched it in 20 minutes. Charlotte hasn't touched hers either. She's too busy sliding a folder across the table like it's a menu and not the end of 5 years.
Just sign it, Noah, she says. Don't make this harder than it needs to be.
I open the folder. Divorce papers, her lawyer's letterhead, a yellow sticky note already marking the line for my signature, like she planned this down to the stationery. You could have told me over the phone, I say.
I wanted to see your face when I told you.
She almost smiles.
I'm with Julian now. Have been for 4 months.
Julian, the commercial developer with the billboard smile, the one who ran into Charlotte at 3 networking events that were suspiciously never on her calendar. I should feel something. Rage, maybe, or the urge to beg. Instead, there's just a strange quiet, like standing in a house after the power's gone out. 4 months, I repeat.
You were always going to end up like this, she says, gesturing at me, at my flannel shirt, my hands still gray with sanding dust from the shop, at the man who spends his days gluing broken chair legs back together for people who tip in exact change. Aimless, poor. I can't keep waiting for you to become something. I look at her for a long moment. 5 years of Sunday mornings, of her laugh, of promises neither of us kept the way we meant to. And I realize the woman across from me has already left. This is just her doing the paperwork on her way out the door. I pick up the pen. I don't argue. I don't perform heartbreak for her benefit. I just sign, line after line, while she watches with something close to relief.
That's it?
She asks, almost disappointed I didn't fight for her.
That's it, I say.
She stands, pulls her coat on, and for a second I think she might say something kind. Instead, she checks her phone, probably a text from Julian, and walks out without looking back.
Her suitcase is already in the trunk of a car idling outside. She packed before she even told me. She was that sure. I sit alone in the diner for a while, staring at my own signature like it belongs to a stranger. Then I pay for 2 coffees neither of us drank and walk the 6 blocks back to my shop. My shop smells like varnish and cedar, the way it always has. I built this place with my hands after my mother died and left me nothing but a set of old woodworking tools and a stack of unpaid bills. I've spent 12 years turning broken furniture into something worth keeping. It's not glamorous, it never made me rich, but it was mine. I unlock the door, flip the sign to open out of habit, and I'm halfway to the workbench when I hear car doors. Not 1, 3. I look through the window and see 3 black sedans parked outside my shop like something out of a movie. The kind of cars that don't belong on a street where the biggest event of the year is the Lobster Festival.
6 people climb out, suits pressed sharp enough to cut glass.
One of them carries a briefcase like it's made of something more valuable than leather. The bell above my door rings. "Mr. Noah Jackson?" the lead man asks. He's maybe 60, silver hair, the kind of calm that only comes from being paid an obscene amount of money to stay calm. "That's me," I say, still holding a half-sanded table leg. "Can I help you?" "My name is Harold Whitfield. I'm the senior estate attorney for Jackson Global Holdings." He sets the briefcase on my workbench, careful not to disturb the sawdust. "We've been trying to locate you for 3 days." "I think you have the wrong Jackson," I say. "I fix chairs." Whitfield doesn't smile, but something in his face softens, like he's about to hand someone news that will break them open. Good or bad, he can't tell yet. "Your father was Arthur Jackson," he says. The table leg slips out of my hand. "My father left when I was little. He didn't leave an address, he didn't leave support. He didn't leave anything." "He left everything," Whitfield says, "under a different name. Arthur built one of the largest private real estate empires in the country, quietly, deliberately, for almost 40 years. He passed 8 months ago. The estate has been in legal limbo since because of a clause he wrote into the trust himself." "What clause?" Whitfield opens the briefcase. Inside is a single folder, thinner than Charlotte's divorce papers, but somehow heavier. "The inheritance could not transfer to you while you were legally married," he says. "Your father built a protection into the trust, one designed specifically to prevent a spouse from claiming half of an estate they never earned. He didn't want history repeating itself. It seems your mother wasn't the only person he watched get burned by someone chasing money instead of him." I stare at the folder, at the number typed at the top of the first page. Total estate valuation, $50,412,000,000. My mouth goes dry. 50 billion. "Yes, sir. And the trust only released because 40 minutes ago, county records confirmed your divorce was finalized," Whitfield says. "The moment your wife's signature hit that page, Mr. Jackson, you became the sole heir to your father's entire empire." I stand in my dusty little shop, surrounded by half-finished furniture, holding a folder worth more money than most countries generate in a year. And I finally understand something Charlotte never gave me the chance to say back in that diner. She didn't just divorce a poor man. She divorced a fortune she will spend the rest of her life watching from the outside. I don't remember much of the flight to New York. Just Whitfield across from me on the private jet, walking me through documents I couldn't fully process. Deeds, shell companies, a foundation with my father's name on it that funds shelters in 6 states. 40 years of a secret life, and I was catching up to it in real time, 30,000 feet in the air. I had no idea that same week Charlotte was watching her new life come apart, thread by thread. Charlotte woke up in Julian's penthouse to sunlight pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. This was the life she'd pictured, the one she'd given up 5 years of comfortable, boring stability for. Marble countertops, a view that cost more per month than Noah's entire shop made in a year. She should have felt like she'd won. Instead, she felt Julian's phone buzzing against the nightstand at 6 in the morning, over and over, until he finally snatched it up and walked into the bathroom to take the call in a hushed, tight voice she'd never heard him use before. "It's nothing," he told her when he came out. "Investors, you know how it is." By the 3rd day, it wasn't nothing. A woman from a collections agency called the penthouse landline, a landline Charlotte didn't even know still worked, asking for Julian by his full legal name in a tone that made her stomach turn. 2 of his credit cards declined at brunch, and he'd laughed it off as a bank error, but his hand had trembled, reaching for a 3rd card that barely worked either. "Everything's fine," he kept saying. "I just need a few weeks. Things are tight right now, that's all." Charlotte told herself it was normal. Rich men had cash flow problems. She'd read about it. Real estate was complicated, leveraged, cyclical. She stayed quiet and told herself patience was the price of the life she wanted. Then, 5 days in, she sat under a heat lamp at a nail salon on Madison Avenue, her phone face down beside her, half listening to the television mounted in the corner. A financial news anchor's voice cut through the low chatter of the salon.
In a stunning development this morning, Jackson Global Holdings, one of the most quietly powerful real estate empires in the country, has officially re-emerged from decades of privacy. Founder Arthur Jackson passed away 8 months ago, and control of the $50 billion estate has now formally transferred to his son and sole heir, Noah Jackson, a previously unknown furniture restorer from coastal Maine. Charlotte's hand froze mid-air, the nail tech still holding her fingers. Noah Jackson. There was a photo on the screen. Him. Her Noah. In a suit that fit like it had been made for him that morning, standing at a podium, sawdust-free, calm, unreadable. In his first major move as CEO, Jackson bought out a heavily leveraged mid-sized development firm from imminent liquidation, a firm owned by developer Julian Reyes, whose company had reportedly missed 3 consecutive debt payments before the buyout. The room tilted. Charlotte pulled her hand back so fast the nail tech yelped, polish smearing across her knuckle. Julian's firm. Bought out. By Noah. She thought of the phone calls at 6 in the morning, the declining cards, the tight, cornered look on Julian's face every time his phone rang. He hadn't told her any of it. He'd let her sit in his crumbling penthouse thinking it was temporary, thinking she'd traded up, while the whole time his company was being swallowed by the one man she'd walked away from without a second glance. She barely made it out of the salon before she called him. Julian didn't answer. Not the first time, not the 5th. When he finally picked up, his voice was flat, stripped of every ounce of charm he'd used to pull her out of her marriage in the first place. "It's under control," he said. "The buyout actually saves the company, saves my job. I still run operations."
You work for him now?
Silence. "Technically," Julian said, "I answer to the board, and the board answers to Jackson Global." Charlotte sat down hard on a bench outside the salon, her manicure ruined, her stomach in knots. The man she'd left everything for was now, in every way that mattered, an employee of the husband she'd humiliated in a diner 2 weeks ago. She needed to hear his voice, not Julian's, Noah's. She scrolled to his contact, thumb hovering over the call button, rehearsing what she'd say. That she made a mistake, that the divorce was a moment of weakness, that surely a man as decent as Noah would at least listen. She pressed call. "This number is no longer accepting calls from this contact." She tried again, thinking it was a glitch. Same message, cold, mechanical, final. She sat on that bench for a long time, Manhattan traffic roaring past her, the city she'd dreamed of finally hers on paper, and utterly foreign in practice. Somewhere in a boardroom she'd never be invited into, Noah Jackson, quiet, aimless, poor Noah, was rebuilding an empire without her. And for the first time since she'd signed those papers, Charlotte Reyes wondered if she'd made a mistake that money could never undo. A month into this new life, I still catch myself reaching for tools that aren't there. Old habits. In my hotel suite in Boston, I find myself absently rubbing my thumb against my palm, checking for sawdust that isn't there anymore. Whitfield says I'll adjust. I'm not sure adjusting is the right word for what's happening to me. We're in Boston for the acquisition of Hallowell & Finch, a 200-year-old publishing house my father owned in complete secrecy. Turns out he loved rare books the way I loved restoring broken chairs. Quietly, without needing anyone to know. Going through his private notes, I find annotations in the margins of first editions, small observations in his handwriting. It's strange getting to know a man through the things he touched instead of the things he said. I never got either from him while he was alive. The press conference happens in the ballroom of a heritage hotel near the old publishing house. I say a few prepared words about preserving the company's legacy, about honoring craftsmanship. Words that feel truer coming out of my mouth than any boardroom jargon Whitfield's team wrote for me. Cameras flash. Reporters shout questions about the estate, about my father,
about what it's like to go from furniture repairman to billionaire overnight, a phrase I'm already sick of hearing. I'm heading through the lobby afterward, flanked by 2 members of my security detail, a concept I still find absurd, needing security to walk through a hotel. When I hear her voice cut through the noise like a blade through fabric I thought had already healed. Noah? I stop. I don't want to. My legs just do it on their own, some old reflex from 5 years of turning toward that voice every time it called my name. Charlotte is standing near the concierge desk, and she looks different than she did in the diner. Thinner, somehow, despite it only being a month. Her hair isn't as polished. There's a run in her stocking she hasn't noticed or doesn't care about anymore. "Please," she says, stepping closer before my security can react. "Just 2 minutes." I hold up a hand, and my team backs off, though they don't go far. "How did you find me?" I ask. "It's not hard when your face is on every news channel in the country," she says, and there's no bitterness in it, just exhaustion. Then her composure cracks. "Noah, I made a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake. Julian, he lied to me about everything. His money, his company, what he actually is." "I heard," I say. "Then you understand. I was manipulated. I was stressed and confused, and he said things that turned my head, and I wasn't thinking clearly when I signed." "You weren't confused when you brought a folder with a sticky note already marking the signature line?" I say, my voice calm, quieter than I expect it to be. "You weren't stressed when you had a car waiting outside with your bags already packed? You'd been planning that morning for weeks, Charlotte. Maybe months." Her face crumples. "That's not fair. It's the truth. You didn't leave because you were stressed. You left because you looked at me and decided I wasn't worth staying for, that I was aimless, poor, a waste of your time." I keep my voice even, no anger in it, just the flat weight of fact. "You were right about one thing. I wasn't going to become something on any schedule you approved of. I was just going to keep being exactly who I was. You just didn't know who that actually was yet. Neither did I." "I love you," she says, and her voice breaks on the word, tears sliding freely now, right there in the lobby, cameras from the press conference still lingering near the doors. "Please, I'll do anything. I'll fight for us." I look at her, really look, searching for the anger I expected to feel, the satisfaction people always talk about in stories like this. Instead, there's just a hollow, quiet sadness, like standing at the edge of a house fire after it's already burned down to the frame. Nothing left to save. Nothing left to mourn except the shape of what used to be there. "I loved you for 5 years," I say. "I would have stayed poor with you forever and never once resented it, because I thought that's what love was supposed to look like. But you taught me something in that diner, Charlotte. You taught me love isn't supposed to come with conditions attached to my bank account." "Noah." "I don't feel angry at you," I say, and I mean it, which somehow makes it worse for both of us. I just don't feel anything at all, and I think that scares me more than the anger would. I turn and walk toward the door, and this time it's my security stepping in, gently guiding her back as reporters outside catch the tail end of the scene through the glass. A woman crying in a hotel lobby, a billionaire walking away without looking back. By tomorrow, it'll be a headline. By next week, it'll be forgotten by everyone, except the 2 people who actually lived it. I slide into the back of my car, and through the tinted window, I watch Charlotte standing there under the flashbulbs, smaller than I remember her ever looking, swallowed by a lobby that suddenly seems too big for her. The car pulls away. I don't look back again. 3 months in, and the empire still feels like someone else's coat I'm wearing. I've relocated to London, temporarily, to audit my father's overseas holdings, a portfolio of properties and investments so tangled that even Whitfield's team needs weeks just to map it out. I tell myself this is why I took the assignment personally instead of delegating it. The truth is simpler. Work is the only thing that doesn't leave room for thinking about Boston, about that lobby, about the sound of Charlotte's voice breaking on the word love. My office in Mayfair overlooks a quiet garden square, all black iron gates and old brick, the kind of address my father apparently favored. Understated, easy to overlook, exactly like him. I spend my days buried in ledgers written in 3 currencies, and my nights in a flat with too many rooms for one person, restoring an old writing desk I found in storage just to keep my hands busy. Old habits. Back in New York, I hear later, Charlotte's life had already started coming apart at the seams before Julian finally let go of it completely. Julian ended things with a text message, not even a phone call, a paragraph sent at 11:47 p.m. while Charlotte was still folding laundry in the penthouse she no longer had a legal right to. His company had been formally restructured under Jackson Global's parent holding group, and the new terms required leadership stability, which was corporate language for no personal liabilities that could embarrass the brand. Charlotte, it turned out, had become exactly that kind of liability. Her face was now permanently linked to 2 billionaires in tabloid headlines, and Julian's new board didn't want the noise. This isn't working. I need to focus on rebuilding. I think you should move out by the end of the week. She read it 4 times before the words actually landed. Then she sat on the edge of the bed she'd shared with him for 5 months and realized she had nowhere to go. Her old apartment was gone, sublet the week she left Noah. Her savings, once modest but stable, had been drained slowly on dinners and dresses meant to keep pace with a lifestyle that had never actually belonged to her. And worse, she was still legally attached to 2 apartment leases Julian had convinced her to co-sign for tax purposes, both of which were now, somehow, entirely her problem. She had exactly one plan left, and it terrified her, because it required admitting, out loud, that she still believed in it. She would find Noah. In person. Not through a phone call blocked before it could ring, not through a chance encounter in a hotel lobby he could walk away from. She'd find him somewhere he couldn't simply leave. It took her 2 weeks and the last of her savings to trace his corporate flight logs. A favor called in from an old friend who worked at a private aviation company, who shouldn't have shared the information, but did, because Charlotte still knew how to make people feel sorry for her. London. Private office, Mayfair. Easy enough to find once she had the neighborhood. She flew economy, sold the diamond earrings Julian had given her in the first giddy month of their affair, and stood outside my building on a grey London morning, wearing a coat too thin for the weather, rehearsing the same speech she'd given me in Boston, hoping repetition might finally make it land. She didn't get past the front desk. My legal team had already flagged the possibility. Whitfield, cautious as ever, insisted on protocols the moment the Boston lobby footage made international news. When Charlotte gave her name at reception, a member of my legal staff met her within minutes, polite, professional, and utterly immovable. He handed her a sealed envelope instead of a meeting. Inside was a formal cease and desist order, drafted with the kind of precision only expensive lawyers can produce, barring further unsolicited contact, citing the Boston incident by name, threatening legal consequences dressed up in careful, bloodless language. I wasn't even in the building that day. I was 2 floors up in a meeting about a shipping port acquisition in Rotterdam, completely unaware she'd flown across an ocean to stand in my lobby. I found out afterward, in a brief note from Whitfield, the way you'd hear about a delivery that was refused and returned to sender. Charlotte stood on the sidewalk outside my building for a long time afterward, the envelope shaking slightly in her hands, London traffic moving around her like she was a stone in a river. She realized, standing there in the cold, that the man she was chasing didn't live in the same world as the one she remembered. He wasn't the version of Noah who'd wait up for her, who'd forgive a mistake because forgiveness had always been easier than being alone. That man had been buried the moment she signed those papers in a diner 3,000 miles away. And in his place stood something colder, sharper, a wall with a name and a legal team, impenetrable in a way heartbreak alone couldn't crack. She folded the cease and desist order into her coat pocket and walked back toward the tube station, already calculating how she'd afford the flight home, already understanding, somewhere beneath the panic, that this door, unlike the others, was never going to open again. 6 months in, I finally find something that feels less like inheritance and more like purpose. The Uffizi Gallery reached out to Jackson Global's new philanthropic arm about funding the restoration of a rare manuscript collection. Centuries-old texts damaged by decades of poor storage before Florence modernized its archives. Whitfield forwarded me the proposal, expecting a signature and a wire transfer. Instead, I flew out myself. I told the board it was due diligence. The truth is simpler than that, too. For the first time since the diner, I found paperwork that made me feel like the person I used to be. Someone who fixed broken things with his hands, not just his checkbook. That's how I meet Dr. Elena Vance. She's the lead conservator on the project, an American who's lived in Florence for 8 years, with paint-stained fingers and a habit of talking with her hands like she's still holding a brush. When we're introduced in the workshop, surrounded by climate-controlled cases and manuscripts older than my father's entire fortune, she doesn't call me Mr. Jackson. She doesn't ask about the estate, or Charlotte, or any of the headlines that have followed me across 3 continents. "You're the one who restores furniture," she says instead, examining me like I'm a piece she's deciding whether to authenticate. "I read that somewhere, buried under 6 paragraphs about your net worth." "Guilty," I say. "Good," she says, "because I need someone on this project who actually understands what it means to save something instead of just paying for its funeral." We spend the next several weeks working side by side more than I strictly need to. I learn the difference between conservation and restoration, how her job is to preserve exactly what's there, flaws and damage included, while mine used to be about making broken things whole again. She teaches me to see beauty in the cracks of a 400-year-old binding, instead of wanting to sand them smooth. I find myself looking forward to the workshop each morning, the way I used to look forward to opening my old shop, before 3 black sedans changed everything. Elena doesn't perform around me. She argues when she thinks I'm wrong, which is often, and laughs. Really laughs, not the polite corporate chuckle I've grown used to when I make a joke that isn't particularly funny. She sees Noah, the man who respects history enough to fund a project with no return on investment beyond a few old books surviving another century. Not Noah Jackson, heir to $50 billion. I don't think she's fully clocked yet how much those 2 versions of me have started merging into one person I actually recognize. I'm hosting a small private event in the garden of a restored Tuscan villa outside the city. Donors, curators, a handful of press invited to see the manuscripts before they're sealed back into archival storage. Elena's beside me, mid-sentence about the ink composition of a 15th century psalter, golden evening light falling through olive trees, when I notice a woman standing at the edge of the garden who doesn't belong on the guest list. Charlotte. Thinner than Boston, thinner than the version of her I remember from a lifetime ago in Maine. She's wearing a dress that looks expensive but old, like it was bought during a better month and worn since without much care. I later learned she sold her jewelry, what little Julian left her, plus a few pieces from our marriage she'd apparently never returned, just to afford the flight. She waits until the small crowd thins near the wine table, then approaches, and this time she doesn't rehearse a speech. She just drops to her knees in the grass in front of me, in front of Elena, in front of donors who will absolutely mention this at dinner parties for years. "Please," she says, voice raw, stripped of any performance now. "A second chance. That's all I'm asking. I know what I did. I know I don't deserve it.
But I still love you, Noah. And I'm asking anyway, because I have nothing left to lose by asking.
The garden goes quiet around us. Elena doesn't step back, doesn't look embarrassed or triumphant. She just watches, steady, letting this be mine to handle. I crouch down so I'm level with Charlotte, and for a moment I almost feel the old pull, the reflex of a man who spent 5 years wanting to fix whatever was broken in front of him. The man you left in that diner, I say quietly, just for her, died the day you signed those papers. I'm not him anymore, Charlotte. I don't say that to punish you. I say it because it's true, and I think some part of you already knows it, or you wouldn't look so surprised every time I say no.
I can change,
she whispers. I know you can, I say, standing again. I hope you do, but not for me, not toward me. That road's closed. I walk back inside toward Elena, who falls into step beside me without a word, and behind us I hear Charlotte's breath catch. Not a scream, not a scene, just the quiet, agonizing sound of a door closing somewhere she can't see anymore. Under the darkening Tuscan sky, alone in the grass where I left her, Charlotte finally understands that some closed doors don't reopen no matter how hard you knock. They just get further away with every year that passes. 9 months since the diner, and I've stopped counting the days like a sentence being served. Somewhere between London's ledgers and Florence's manuscripts, the math stopped mattering. What matters now is what I'm building. Tonight, that building has a name, the Jackson Cultural Preservation Fund, launched at the Grand Palais under a glass ceiling built for exhibitions of things far less complicated than my life. 600 guests. Museum directors, conservators, philanthropists, 3 heads of state who sent representatives instead of coming themselves. The fund will finance restoration projects worldwide. Florence was the proof of concept. This is the announcement that it wasn't a one-time thing. Elena stands beside me for most of the evening, not as my date exactly, though the press will call her that by morning regardless of what either of us says. She's here because the fund's first 3 projects are hers to oversee, and because somewhere, over the last 3 months, standing beside her stopped feeling like a professional arrangement and started feeling like the only part of these events I actually enjoy. I give a short speech, shorter than Whitfield's team wants, longer than I'm comfortable with, about my father's belief that history is worth saving even when it doesn't pay you back. I mention Elena by name, crediting her expertise, and the room's applause feels different than the polite claps at the Boston press conference. Warmer. Earned. What I don't know, standing at that podium under all that light, is that Charlotte is somewhere in the crowd. She'd used the last of her connections, a former colleague from her old marketing job who now freelanced for a fashion outlet with press credentials to spare, to forge her way into the gala. It wasn't hard. A borrowed badge, a black dress bought on a payment plan she couldn't really afford, and the particular kind of desperation that makes a person invisible in a room full of people performing importance. She stood at the edge of the ballroom, near a pillar, half hidden behind a waiter's tray of champagne she didn't touch, and watched me finish my speech. She told herself she just wanted to see me. That was the lie she'd been telling herself since Florence, that if she could just catch my eye once more, something might crack open between us again. But standing there, watching me step down from the podium and lean toward Elena to say something that made her laugh, really laugh, head tilted back, easy and unguarded, Charlotte understood she wasn't going to get what she came for. It wasn't the laughter that broke her. It was the quiet after it. The way Elena reached out and straightened my collar, without either of us seeming to notice we'd become the kind of couple who did small, unconscious things like that for each other. The way I let her do it, mid-conversation with a museum director, without breaking stride. 5 years of marriage, and Charlotte couldn't remember me ever looking that at ease standing next to her. She'd spent 9 months telling herself the story where I was punishing her, cold, distant, holding a grudge like a weapon. Standing in that ballroom, she finally saw the truth she'd been avoiding since Boston. I wasn't punishing her at all. I'd simply moved on, the way a river moves around a stone, without malice, without even much memory of the obstacle once it's behind you. The weight of it hit her physically. Her knees actually went weak. She had to put a hand on the pillar to stay upright, waiters and gala guests moving past her like she was furniture. She thought about the diner, the sticky note on the divorce papers, the satisfaction she'd felt sliding those pages across the table, so certain she was trading up, so sure that a furniture repairman with sawdust on his hands could never become someone worth staying for. She'd been so focused on what she thought she was gaining with Julian, the penthouse, the parties, the appearance of a bigger life, that she never once considered what she was actually giving up. Not the money. She could tell herself it was about the money, and some nights that lie let her sleep. But standing in that ballroom, watching me exist so fully, so peacefully, in a life she'd never get to see up close again, Charlotte understood it was never really about the $50 billion. It was about a man who would have loved her exactly as she was, for exactly as long as she let him, if she'd simply been faithful to what they already had, instead of chasing what she thought she deserved instead. She left before the gala ended, slipping out through a side entrance before security doing rounds could recognize her from the Boston headlines. She didn't try to approach me. She didn't drop to her knees this time. There was nothing left to ask for, and some quiet, exhausted part of her finally understood that. Outside, the Paris night was cold and bright with streetlights, and Charlotte stood on the pavement in her borrowed dress, watching through the tall windows as I moved through the party. Unreachable now in every sense that mattered, surrounded by a life built entirely without her, glowing with the kind of warmth she used to take for granted when it was hers to keep. She hailed a cab alone, and somewhere over the Atlantic on her flight home the next morning, Charlotte finally stopped rehearsing speeches. There was no version of the truth left to tell me that would change anything. The only story left now was the one she'd have to live inside, the one where she'd had everything once, and let it walk out a diner door without even trying to stop it. A year now since the diner. I'm in Chicago this time, standing in the atrium of a university engineering building that didn't exist 18 months ago, watching students file in for the inaugural ceremony of the Arthur Jackson Architectural Scholarship. Full tuition, 4 years, awarded to students who can't otherwise afford to study the kind of restoration work that used to be my entire life, before it became a footnote in a much bigger story. I still do the work myself sometimes, when I can steal an afternoon. There's a workshop attached to the scholarship program, and I've spent more hours there than my schedule technically allows, elbow deep in a walnut cabinet some student found in a demolition pile, showing a room of 19-year-olds how to read the grain of old wood the way my mother taught me before she died. Elena thinks it's the healthiest part of my week. I think she's right. I don't think about Charlotte much anymore. Not out of bitterness, just distance. The natural kind that grows between a life and the thing that used to threaten to end it. But I hear, through channels I don't go looking for, that her year has gone very differently than mine. Charlotte came back to the States from Paris with nothing left to chase and no clear idea what came after. The apartment she'd shared with Julian was gone, sold out from under her the moment the lease disputes settled, leaving her with a modest legal bill and an eviction notice she hadn't seen coming. Her name, once just Charlotte Reyes, private citizen, had become something else entirely. A punchline in gossip columns, a footnote in every article about the Jackson estate,
The ex-wife mentioned in the same breath as billion-dollar acquisitions and gala photographs of me and Elena that circulated more than either of us would have liked. She applied for marketing jobs across the city. She'd been good at her work once, before all of this. A rising coordinator at a mid-size firm with real potential. But every interview seemed to end the same way. A polite handshake, a promise to be in touch, and silence afterward. It took her months to understand why. A hiring manager finally told her the truth over coffee, not unkindly. Companies didn't want the attention, didn't want a hire whose face was recognizable from headlines about billionaires and betrayal, whose personal life had become more interesting to the press than her actual qualifications. She wasn't being punished. She was simply too visible now, in the worst possible way, for anyone to want to take the risk. She eventually took a job at a small suburban marketing firm outside the city, half the salary of her old position, doing work well beneath what she used to be capable of. Her new co-workers didn't know at first, until someone finally connected the name, and the whispering started in the break room, quiet enough to pretend she couldn't hear it. That's her, the one who left the billionaire before he was a billionaire. She learned to eat lunch at her desk. She moved into a small one-bedroom apartment on a street that never seemed to sleep. Buses grinding past at all hours, a neighbor upstairs who paced at 2 a.m. for reasons she never learned. It was nothing like the penthouse. Nothing like the coastal cottage she and I had once rented for our honeymoon either. The one she used to say was the happiest week of her life, before she decided happiness needed a bigger price tag. The worst part, she told a friend once over wine she could barely afford, wasn't the smaller apartment, or the diminished job, or even the whispers at the office. It was the scholarship program. It was the foundation. It was the fact that she couldn't escape me even in the small, ordinary corners of her day. The Jackson Free Public Library expansion was advertised on a billboard she passed every morning on her commute. The Arthur Jackson Architectural Scholarship was profiled in a trade magazine that sat in her office's waiting room. A digital ad for the Cultural Preservation Fund played before videos she watched on her phone at night, my name appearing in clean, modern type against a backdrop of some manuscript or gallery she'd never see in person. She couldn't turn on a television, scroll through a feed, or walk down a Chicago street without some fragment of the empire she'd walked away from finding its way back to her, indifferent to the fact that she was watching. It wasn't cruelty on my part. I never once directed a campaign at her, never used the foundation as a weapon the way tabloids sometimes speculated I might. It was simpler and somehow crueler than that. I was just living my life, building something real, and the scale of it meant she couldn't avoid the reminders no matter how small her own life had become in comparison. She started to understand, sitting in her noisy apartment at night with the neighbor's footsteps overhead, that she wasn't trapped by me. She was trapped by the decision she'd made in a diner over a year ago, a decision that had detonated so quietly at first and then kept expanding outward year after year, touching every part of her life long after the initial explosion had passed. Every billboard, every headline, every accidental glimpse of my name was just an echo of that one morning she'd been so certain she was choosing something better. She'd wanted a bigger life. She'd gotten one, just not the version she'd imagined, and not in the way that let her enjoy any part of it. I go home for the first time since the diner. Whitfield's team wanted to send a regional director to handle the ribbon cutting for the Jackson Free Public Library. I overruled them. Some things you don't delegate. And standing on the site of my old bookshop, watching a building rise where I used to sand chair legs for exact change, felt like something I needed to witness with my own hands. The way I used to check the grain of a table before I called it finished. The town hasn't changed much. Same salt air, same gray winter light off the harbor,
Same diner 2 blocks down, where a woman once slid divorce papers across a laminate table and changed the entire shape of my life, without meaning to change it the way it actually turned out. I walk past it on my way to the site visit and feel almost nothing. Not nostalgia, not anger, just the mild recognition of a place that used to matter more than it does now. The library itself is beautiful. My father's architects and Elena's conservation team worked together on it for months, blending old-town brick with clean, modern glass, a reading room with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the harbor, where fishing boats still come in at dusk the way they did when I was a boy. There's a small plaque near the entrance dedicated to my mother, and another, larger one for my father, a man the town never knew was worth $50 billion, quietly funding scholarships and shelters from 3 states away while his own son grew up thinking he'd simply vanished. The night of the opening, snow falls steadily over Main Street, the kind of soft, persistent snow Maine winters are known for. The whole town turns out. Old customers from my shop, teachers who taught me, the harbor master who used to slip me free coffee on slow mornings when I couldn't afford my own. Elena stands beside me at the entrance, her hand looped through my arm, laughing at something the mayor says, radiant in a way that has nothing to do with cameras or headlines, and everything to do with actually belonging somewhere. I don't see Charlotte in the crowd. I have no idea she's there at all. She'd taken a late-night bus from Chicago 2 days earlier, the cheapest ticket she could find, 17 hours through 3 states with a window seat and nothing but her own thoughts for company. She told herself she wasn't going to approach me. She'd learned that lesson in Florence, in Paris, in every silence since. She just wanted to see it, the library, the town, the life I'd built on the exact spot where my old shop used to stand, the place where everything had once been simple enough that she'd still had a chance to keep it. She stood across the street in the snow, coat pulled tight, watching through the library's tall windows as the ribbon-cutting happened without her, as the mayor made his remarks, as the doors opened and warm, golden light spilled out onto Main Street, along with the sound of applause and laughter she used to be part of. Once, in a much smaller and much less complicated version of my life. She watched me walk through those doors, surrounded by people who mattered to me, old friends, new colleagues, Elena's hand still resting easily in the crook of my arm. And she understood, standing alone in the cold, that she was looking at a version of happiness she'd once held in her hands and set down without noticing its weight until it was gone. The snow kept falling. Her boots were soaked through by the time the crowd began to thin, guests filtering out in 2s and 3s, cars pulling away from the curb, until the street was quiet again and the library glowed warm and steady behind its glass, the last few staff members moving through the reading room, turning off lights section by section. Charlotte crossed the street. She stood at the base of the library steps for a long time, snow collecting on her shoulders, her hand finally reaching for the brass door handle, still slightly warm from the crowd of hands that had touched it that evening. Or maybe she imagined that part. Her fingers curled around it. Then she stopped. She thought about Boston, about Florence, about the cease and desist order still folded somewhere in a drawer back in her Chicago apartment. She thought about the gala in Paris, about watching me exist so easily in a life she no longer had any claim to. She thought about the plaque inside, dedicated to my mother, a woman I'd loved and lost long before Charlotte ever knew me. And she understood, in that instant, standing in the snow with her hand on a door she had no right to open, that some places simply weren't hers to enter anymore. Not because anyone was stopping her, but because she'd already made the choice, months and years ago, that put her on the wrong side of every door that mattered. She let go of the handle. She turned and walked back down Main Street the way she'd come. Snow filling her footprints behind her within minutes, the library's warm light shrinking smaller and smaller until the street curved and it disappeared from view entirely. She caught the last bus out of town that night, sitting alone near the back, watching the coastline vanish into darkness, finally understanding, fully and without argument left in her, that she no longer belonged anywhere near the man she used to call her husband.
2 years now since the diner, and I've stopped measuring my life by that morning at all. I'm sitting in the courtyard of the Jackson Free Public Library, the one built where my old shop used to stand, an early spring sun warming the brick beneath me. There's an old text open on my lap, a 15th century treatise on shipbuilding that Elena flagged for me weeks ago, insisting I'd love the marginalia. She's right, the way she usually is about these things. I'm waiting for her. She's finishing a final inspection of a restoration project 2 towns over and promised to meet me here before dinner. I look up sometimes at the harbor beyond the courtyard wall, boats coming in with the tide, and I think about how strange it is that peace arrived so quietly. I expected, somewhere in the wreckage of that first year, that becoming whole again would feel dramatic, a single moment I could point to and say, there, that's when it happened. Instead, it happened the way good restoration always does. Slowly, in layers, one steady hand at a time, until one day you look at the thing in front of you and realize it was never broken beyond repair, just waiting for someone patient enough to work on it properly. I hear footsteps on the gravel path, and I know without looking up that it's Elena, because I've learned the particular rhythm of her walk the way I used to learn the grain of old wood, instinctively, without trying. She sits beside me on the bench, still smelling faintly of the archival gloves she wears all day, and rests her head against my shoulder without a word. We don't need many words anymore. That, more than anything, is how I know this is the life I was supposed to have all along. Later, after she's gone home to change for dinner, I find myself thinking, not for the first time, but for what feels like the last, about Charlotte. Not with anger, not even with the hollow sadness I carried through Boston and Florence. Just a quiet acknowledgement, the way you might nod at a stranger you once knew a long time ago in a different life. I hope, wherever she is, she's found some version of peace, too. Miles away, in a small apartment on a Chicago street that never quite sleeps, Charlotte is packing up boxes for the 3rd move in 2 years. A slightly better apartment this time, a small promotion finally earned at the marketing firm after 18 months of proving herself twice as hard as anyone who didn't carry her name into every job interview. It isn't the life she once imagined, but it's steady. It's hers, built without anyone's money but her own, and there's something in that she's only recently learned to be quietly proud of. She finds the box while clearing out the hallway closet, an old shoebox she'd forgotten she still had, tucked behind winter coats she rarely wears anymore. Inside are fragments of a life she used to live. Ticket stubs from a movie theater that closed years ago, a pressed flower from a garden neither of us can remember the name of now, and, near the bottom, our wedding photo. She sits down on the floor of her half-packed apartment and looks at it for a long time. Younger versions of both of us, standing on the coastal Maine dock where we married, before empires and headlines and diners full of quiet cruelty. She almost doesn't notice the edge of the cardboard backing has come loose until it slips slightly in her hands, revealing a folded slip of paper tucked behind the photograph itself. She unfolds it carefully. My handwriting, unmistakably younger, looser, written in the years when I owned nothing but a set of tools and a small apartment above my shop. No matter where life takes us, my home is with you. I had written it the week we married, tucked it behind the photo as a private joke between us. Something to find years later. A message from a version of myself who believed, completely and without hesitation, that whatever came next, home would always mean the same two people in the same room. Charlotte holds the note for a long time, and the tears that come aren't loud or dramatic. They're quiet, the kind that arrive when a person finally stops arguing with the truth. She thinks about the diner, about the sticky note on the divorce papers, about every door she knocked on afterward, hoping it might somehow still open. Boston, Florence, Paris, the snow outside a library in Maine. She understands now, fully, without any argument left to make, that the man who wrote those words believed them completely once. And that belief, whatever it might have grown into, was hers to keep or lose the day she decided a folder and a pen mattered more than finding out. She doesn't call me. She doesn't write back, or show up somewhere I might be, or ask one more time for a door that's long since closed for good. She's learned, slowly and painfully, that some things don't get undone just because you finally understand what they cost. She folds the note back along its old crease, places it gently at the bottom of a drawer beneath sweaters she'll wear next winter, and closes it. Not because she's forgotten, because she's finally accepted, quietly, without an audience, in an ordinary apartment on an ordinary evening, that some betrayals don't have a second chapter. Some doors, once they close, simply become part of the wall. Outside her window, the city moves on, indifferent and bright. And somewhere on a coast 3 states away, in a courtyard built where sawdust once settled over broken furniture, a man who used to be nobody sits quietly in the evening light, finally, fully, and permanently at peace.